Hello and welcome to Teenagers Untangled, the audio hug for parents going through the teenage years. I'm Rachel Richards, parenting coach, journalist, mother of 2 teenagers and 2 bonus daughters. Now, it's hard enough being a parent of a teenager, but what if you have a child with needs that are, shall we say, complex? By that I mean perhaps ADHD, autism, dyslexia, kids who are highly reactive. If you have one like this, you'll know it's just different. As my friend once said to me about her son, I've been to all the parenting classes, they tell me what to do, and then there's my son. Anyway, we have a treat for you. Today, we're joined by Elaine Taylor-Klaus of Impact ADHD, who wrote The Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kids. I've read it cover to cover, and I can honestly say it's one of the best books I've ever read across on this topic.
Thank you.
Welcome, Elaine. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us about this. There are so many tools that you talk about, and I actually think it's good for every parent, not just for the sort of parent we've just described. So, and I love the way your book is written from personal experience, because I think there's an awful lot of sense that, you know, we hear people who are very worthy, who've done all the studies, and they know what they're talking about in terms of studies, but actually living this experience is very, very meaningful. Shall we start by exploring what things would indicate that we have a complex kid?
So first of all, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here, and so many things just in your introduction I want to respond to, because I love talking about teenagers, and I think teenagers get a bad rap. And I think that parenting the teenage years is some of the most fun stuff you can ever do, and we have to get those biases out of the way so we can really be present to them. When I talk about a complex kid, I am talking about kids who struggle with life or learning or behavior or social issues or school issues or emotional regulation. Kids who on some level, someplace in their life may not be hitting the metric that we expect of them, maybe in some way different from their neurotypical peers. And oftentimes with these kids, they may be complex in one area, but not all areas.
Often they have a
Right?
spiky
There's
profile, don't they?
a kind of inconsistency. They're consistently inconsistent. Spiky profile is a great way to put it.
In your book, you talk about coaching and reframing situations. Can you explain to us what generally you mean when you're talking about trying to coach your kids rather than the way we all might normally parent?
So the secret to what we do, and it was when we first started, it was Impact Parents. We've expanded. We are also now Impact. It was Impact ADHD. It's now Impact Parents. The secret is that we teach neurodiversity informed coaching skills to parents. And we do that because when I was a parent that was struggling and I became a coach, it was like a light bulb turned on, and everything shifted with how I was communicating with my kids in really beautiful, profound ways. And I'm not suggesting that people become their kids' coach, but when you take a coach-like approach, it's an empowerment-based approach. Coaching is an empowerment-based modality. It's about meeting people where they are and helping them move forward and create whatever they want to create for themselves in their lives, which is ultimately what we want to do as parents. And in the modern world, the old paradigms of I'm the parent, you just listen to me and do what I say, they're out the window. They no longer apply. Our kids are exposed to a global world at the age of 4. And so we cannot treat them like they're in this bubble. We have to enroll them in what it means to live in the world we live in, and enroll them in becoming their own personal self-managers. And the process of doing that works really well with this kind of coaching approach that's about, it's a collaborative parenting style. It's about stepping alongside them and moving forward with them instead of standing in front of them and dragging them forward.
Yes, and I think it's easy to slip into that because I think actually when the kids are young, you sort of start off with that type of parenting, and then it's very hard to see the transition when that's supposed to happen and know how it happens, particularly when it's your first kid. I mean, you know, we're all on our first rodeo. We don't really know what we're doing. And it can feel really unsettling when you start having a kid that pushes back and you don't really know how. It's like, how does this work? My steering wheel isn't actually functioning. Yeah.
Or when either when it's your first kid or when your second kid doesn't perform like your first kid, or when your kid has some challenge with some aspects of life or learning. And so what happens, I think a lot, what you're describing, we call it director mode. Every parent starts off in director mode. That's phase one. The problem is that we tend to get stuck there. And it's one thing to direct a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, but when you start trying to direct a 13-year-old, not only are they individually designed to push back, but they're also, you're not helping them learn how to become a conscious, thoughtful decision maker.
One of the things you talk about in your book is getting your kid to, like, you don't want to be the world's expert on your kid. You want them to become the world's expert on them. So what are the things that we can, okay, so coming back to the kind of how we make this transition, because the truth is we're all a bit scared that if we don't, that if our kids don't keep up and if we don't do it right, then they're going to fall behind. And if you've got a kid that's not a straightforward situation, who's not hitting those targets, for example, or who is reacting, very often it's really hard to know how to set expectations. Like, I don't know, like, what am I supposed to expect from my child? How would you help a parent who would come to you and say that sort of?
It's a beautiful question, and a few things come to mind. First of all, I think you referenced this earlier in your introduction, is that, we all get out there, we read our parenting books and we listen to our parenting experts and they tell us what to do. And then we kind of go, yeah, but how? Right? How do I do that in a way that works for my family at 5 o'clock when the pasta is boiling over and right? And so part of setting expectations, I think, is stepping into community, is finding your people, is beginning to see the ways parents come to us a lot, and we're the first time they've ever talked to somebody who gets what their life experience is like. And they think they're alone. They think they're the only ones going through this. And I got news for you. No matter what you're going through out there, I promise you, you're not alone. I promise you, there are other parents, not just one, but there are other parents going through some variation of the world that's very similar to what you're going through. And so you've got to find your people. That's why we started in 2011. The first thing was about community and community and classroom, because we knew coaching worked. So like, you've got a community of people who listen to this podcast and they tune in because when they hear you speaking about these issues, they don't feel so alone.
100%. That's exactly what we're doing. Yes, absolutely. It's
huge.
And it's interesting because so what you're talking about is that how we help ourselves, because that's one of the problems, is that we feel shame, or we feel like, oh, I should be doing this and my kids should be doing this, and we're hearing these should words in our heads, and we don't
should all over ourselves. Right.
So coming back to the question, which was about how do I know how to set realistic expectations, because there was a great phrase that a friend used sometime, a few years back, that just hit a light bulb for me, which was learned dependence. And she said, that she'd seen this in various kids, and hands up, that's what I did. Because, I have a daughter who's dyslexic, and, you look at it and you go, oh, well, yeah, you find this really hard. And you start to sort of step in and take over things where you think they're struggling, rather than giving them the wings. But how do we do that?
So, and I think that what you're asking is a really complicated question.
Very complicated. Tips.
Like they call it learned dependence, also learned helplessness. And I remember having a teacher literally accuse me when my kid was in 7th grade of, this kid's just got learned helplessness and you just need to get out of their way. Well, there's a partial truth to that, but there's also not. When you have complex kids, they need a different level of scaffolding. And so so I go back to community. First, you got to get around your people so that you have your peer group of people you're checking in with understand what you're dealing with. So you're not comparing yourself against the neighbors down the street or the sister-in-law, whoever who's because their kids are perfect, right? So you've got to find your people so that you have a community of people who are also struggling so you hear what's within the realm of typical for your kids and what's not. So that's one thing. Then the next thing is that in our framework, we talk about taking aim. We want to be always working with our kids to cultivate the next level of independence and simultaneously scaffolding other things so that they have the space and the freedom, the capacity to work on that level of independence. So, for example, you're talking about your daughter, you're talking about dyslexia, having school issues. I have a child with dyslexia who's now a 27-year-old medical student, so they can do this, y'all. It just takes a lot of work. So when she was in middle school, at first, I would sit down with her and say, "What do you have for homework?" And I would write it all down. And then as we move forward, then she would say, "Here's what I want you to write down." And then she would guide me. And then she would write it down, but she liked me sitting with her. And then she would do it on her own. So it's an incremental process of I call it passing the baton, right, to them. But while I was working with her on homework, I was getting her a snack and I might have been doing her laundry or, other things so that she was really focusing on taking the ownership of her schoolwork as hers. But it was an incremental process. It didn't just one day, I didn't just say, "Okay, now you're on, I'm off." It doesn't work that way.
Yes, yes. And that's one of the things we talk about where, what happens is our kids become teenagers and then suddenly the expectations ramp up overnight and all the hormones are going mad and we start going, well, they're just getting it all wrong. And actually what we have to do, I love your point about scaffolding, is that actually we have to be realistic and scaffold things so they can pick off things that they can become adept at, and then we can give them a little bit more.
And we want to do it collaboratively. So I often ask the question, whose agenda is it? If it's your agenda, then it's not theirs. Now, it may be a shared agenda. The goal is to move from, when they're younger, homework is our agenda. Okay, it's time to sit down and do homework. Then at some time you move to a collaborative agenda. It's like, so when do you think you want to get your homework done? Notice the shift is you. If you hear as a parent, you hear yourself saying we about homework, you're in director mode. So it's time to shift into collaboration mode. When do you want to do your homework? And then the next stage, so collaboration, we kind of dance between collaboration and then the next is support most of these years. And so we're sharing the agenda. When they take it on and now they've got the mantle, they've got the baton, then we move into support role. How can I help you? What do you need from me? So I'm no longer saying, when are you going to do your homework? I'm coming in and saying, I know you've got it going on this afternoon. I just want you to know we have this happening for dinner just so you can plan your time. Is there anything you need from me? So you see, I've shifted from we're doing this together to I get that you've got this. I'm your support team.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it's taking, I think I did a New Year's resolution blog on this kind of, writing down all the things that they want to be able to do and then just pick one thing and just support everything else. Just do the one thing.
Preferably one thing they care about.
That they care. It has to be something they care about. I mean, I did this about myself, and it's kind of, but it is mirrored with our kids. If we can project that onto our kids and say, well, I'm not going to work on something. If I say I have to lose weight because everyone thinks I'm fat, I'm not going to lose weight because it's not everybody else's agenda. But if I want to make a change that really resonates with me, then I'm going to actually make an effort. So that's exactly what you're talking about, isn't it? It's brilliant. Yeah. And I think one of the things that you're talking about with actually finding a community, I really think is I only recently came to this kind of understanding that community is so important and we need to find it wherever we can. But it's also about the bullies in our heads that are telling us you should do this, you should be this. And I know that in the book, there's so many great things for people to tick off in the book that can help you. But can you just talk to us about how we can go from that sort of panic phase if we're in a situation where we think, oh, I can't handle it, I can't do this, because there's so much noise and disruption. If you've got a noisy household or kids who don't control themselves very well, what can we do to support ourselves?
Oh, there's so many. Such a beautiful question. I was laughing when we said bully because one of the very first articles I ever wrote was called Tame the Bully Within. And it's about the ways that we bully ourselves, the messages we tell ourselves, the shitting all over ourselves. And so I like to talk in metaphors a lot, and I like to give people very practical ways. I like to take complicated stuff and make it simple. So the simple way that I would answer that question is to put the stick down. Because I think we parents have this stick that we hit ourselves over the head with, right? To get ourselves to do stuff. And for years, it was a really effective strategy because it got us to handle everything. But we end up with this kind of well-worn groove in our head from all these years of beating ourselves over the head. And so we have to put the stick down. And to do that, this is no joke. I have my clients go outside and find a stick and bring it inside and put it on your desk or on your kitchen counter or in your car or wherever. And my favorite story was the client who came back to me and said, I painted it and now it's my magic wand. Loved it. But it's a reminder that beating ourselves up isn't serving us, and it's certainly not serving our kids, and it's modeling for our kids not self-love, the opposite of self-love. And so it's very hard to find self-love. I think a lot of it is something that a lot of us struggle with in our lives. My husband and I were just talking about this recently. And it's probably the best gift. This is going to be strange, but it's probably the best gift you can give your kids. If you can learn to stop beating yourself up, I had to practice not saying, I'm such an idiot. Because every time I made a mistake, I would say, "Oh, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I did that." Well, that's not sending out a really healthy message to anybody. And so, yes, yes. Positive intelligence is all about they have you take a picture of your child and put like I had it on my screensaver for a long time, right? So my message here is that self-talk is self-care, and that self-care just starts with how we talk to ourselves. And self-care is not making enough time to get bubble baths and go to spa retreats, and that's not what it's about. When you're raising kids, self-care starts with how you talk to yourself and with self-love and respect.
Yeah. And you mentioned in the book the use of potentially coming up with trigger words that you can, like bubblegum, that you can use in a family setting so that there's a shorthand way of saying, okay, this isn't going to work. Can you
Yeah.
sort of talk through, I think the broccoli was one of them, wasn't it?
Broccoli ice cream.
Broccoli ice cream. So talk to us about this. How can we use this?
So a code word is an agreed term, just as you say, that you use for a shortcut. You don't start with a code word. You start with we're working as a family and we want to improve whatever it is. So one code word for us was my kids love to wrestle. And when they were little, it wasn't long. They would wrestle and then somebody would get upset and then it would cross over, right? And this is a classic family dynamic. And so we had a conversation about, I don't want you to stop wrestling, and I would like you guys to figure out how do you stop it before somebody gets really upset. So how do we handle that? We talked about, so first we had agreement. Everybody wanted that change, right? Back to whose agenda. It had to be their agenda, not mine. Once we shared the agenda, then we could say, okay, well, let's come up with a code word so that when somebody says that, that means everything stops. And so they came up with the word basta, enough, right? And so when somebody said basta, that meant the wrestling stopped. When somebody said rope, That meant I'm about to lose it. And so everybody shifted from whatever dynamic was happening to, okay, our job now is to help this sibling calm down, right? Because rope meant I'm reaching the limit, right? So broccoli ice cream was a great one. That was they have to make up the word. I didn't make up the words. Broccoli ice cream was the term for when someone was hangry, right? When someone was hungry or frustrated and we figured out one of my kids that when they were hungry, they would just get completely dysregulated. And so when we called broccoli ice cream, everything would stop and we wouldn't talk about anything again until we got food. And once we got food, then we could talk about something again. And my kids are now adults and we still use the term broccoli ice cream. I mean, it's a beautiful.
It also helps them to go, oh, it's because I'm hungry. I just need to stop. And because a useful skill in life. My daughter,
Yeah,
when she gets hungry, she becomes a zombie. She just, and she needs someone else. I can see it in her. And like, she needs someone else to just feed her quickly. Otherwise, she just kind of
that's right.
malfunctions. Yes.
Mine too. Mine too. Yeah, and so it's I'd never really thought about it till this conversation, but often we use them for tools for emotional regulation, but not always. Like I had one kid who used to have a jaw drop, like would sit with the mouth open, and so the code word was cookies, and that just meant close your mouth. So I didn't have
And
to
it's a
say
lovely
close your
word.
mouth,
Yes.
right? I had one, it wasn't a word, it was I
Yeah.
just tapped two fingers on the table, meant use your fork.
Okay. I like
So I
that. It
didn't have
doesn't
to
feel
say,
shameful.
right?
No. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. I like that. That's a really nice, gentle, encouraging way of doing it. Lovely.
yeah. And again, the buy-in has to be there first.
Has to be there from them. Yes. And
Yeah.
for them to come up with the word or the action, because then, none of it seems like it's you pushing yourself
You're
on
not
them.
directing,
No,
you're
no, I
collaborating.
love it. I love
Yeah.
it. And one of the things you talk about is this kind of, we need to try and get that message across to them that we believe they can do better rather than we're scared that they're broken or wrong. How can we feel the difference between, fear and
Ah, this is a great question. Okay. So I went to the European Conference on Positive Psychology this summer. And I was speaking there and it was fabulous. Loved it. And two, not one, but two of the keynotes spoke to this issue. One was a guy named Michael Unger in Canada who's done leading world research on resilience. And the other was a guy named Andreas Kraft from Europe who has done some of the greatest research in the world on hope. He's a futurist. Okay. Both of them talked about how important it is for people to see their capacity and to have people who believe in them. So there's been a lot of research on resilience and not just Unger's work, but there was a longitudinal study. There's a lot of work on resilience. And what they've learned is that even kids who start off in very underserved environments and communities, no matter the correlation to their success in life is more about having one adult in their life who believes in them than it is about their intelligence. Because when someone believes in you, it gives you the capacity to believe in yourself. So I say to parents all the time, our job is to hold the vision for them, even when they can't hold it for themselves, because sometimes they can't. And so sometimes it's, I believe in you and I know you can do it. And I know you don't see that about yourself right now. And that's okay. You don't have to because I'm holding it for you. And I've got it till you're ready to believe it. And I will tell you, and this is a true story, this year, my 23-year-old was going through some really, really tough stuff. And he came to my husband and me and he actually said, thank you for holding the vision for me because I really am having a hard time seeing it right now. But I know you've got it. Like it really, really makes a difference for kids to know that you see their capacity because they're kids, they're teenagers. I mean, it's quintessentially they're wired to question everything about themselves.
yes, and to look to us, as the person who who's had all the experience and can see what's out in the world and will tell them, like if they feel like they're broken and we confirm that, then they're going to feel broken.
Exactly. But here's the key is not to let it be one more expectation. So there's a guy named Jerry Schultz who wrote the book Nowhere to Hide. And what he taught me that's really important was not to have the vision become a pressure point. So it's not, I believe in you, I know you can do it. Because if they don't believe it, then that's one more way that they're disappointing you. But if it's, I believe in you, I know you can do it, and I get that you don't see it right now, and that's okay, then it's not setting up one more place where they feel like they're failing.
Yeah, I get that.
Distinction.
Important distinction.
I learned a lot from that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it's interesting because also when it comes to, so there's the belief side and there's also the consequences. Now, I've done an entire episode on how we set consequences. I did a blog on it because I found it so interesting and I wanted to research into it. And really what I found was that consequences only work when there's a connection with the child and when they really believe that actually what you're trying to do is help them rather than punish them. And so when we're trying, we've got a child who's maybe a bit complex or who's got, really struggling with certain skills. How can we create an environment where they're going to learn, but where you've got boundaries and consequences?
So I love what you're saying, and there's a whole section in the book that asks, are you using consequences or as punishments, right? So I talk about that a lot in the book. Well, and so it's a punishment if they couldn't anticipate what the consequence was going to be, right? If you've had the conversation in advance, curfew is 12 o'clock, how are we going to handle it if you come in late? What's the result going to be? That's a consequence because now they know they can take an action that moves them toward or away from that consequence. Now they may, and you've discussed it in advance. Now they may have time management issues, so that may be something to work on. But when you have a natural consequence or a real consequence in place, you get to stay on your kid's team. Instead of being the enforcer, see, I told you, you get to be the, oh man, I'm so sorry you missed it. What can we do to work together to make sure that next time you're able to hit? Because I know you really want your Xbox tonight, and I'm really sorry that you can't have that. What can we do to help set you up for success next time? So now they feel like you're on their team. I like to say, let the system be the bad guy. So the consequence is the system, but it only works if they know what it is in advance and they can anticipate and take action based on that.
Yes, that's I love that way of putting it. Like, oh, I really want this for you, and we need to try and work on how we can get it there. Are there any other things that go on?
Yeah, I just want to say something about that. So we see this a lot around issues of driving. So we're talking about teenagers, right? So
Yes.
a lot of parents get very caught up in my kids not getting their driver's license, or or they're not doing what they need to do, and it becomes our agenda for the kids to get the license instead of theirs. I think that happens a lot. Whereas I would say our kids are smart enough to see that driving is dangerous, and some of them aren't quite ready. So it's very typical for kids to do it later these days. But that's a great place where we can, instead of, well, they're taking their test and they're not doing this, so they're going to fail the exam. It's like, okay, well, what if they fail the driver's exam? What if we get on their team? It's like, man, I'm so sorry. How can I work with you? What do you need to do differently to get it the next time? If we stay on their team instead of expecting from them, we want for them. And that's the distinction I would make.
That's a brilliant distinction. I love it. And it's very pertinent because I did an episode recently on getting your kids learning to drive, which is an interesting one because both me and my co-host are in that process right now. So are there any other real nuggets or useful things that you can hand to the parents who are listening that will help them on this journey?
There are a million. Because I love this work, and this is what I do all day long. I think the coach approach is such a powerful framework for parenting. I think the two things I want to say are this. First, parenting is called parenting for a reason. It's about us. So giving yourself permission to pay attention to yourself and to a space to think about what's important to me, how do I want to be as a parent? Parenting is more about the being than the doing. And we get caught up in the doing, and we get caught up in especially with teenagers. It's task over relationship, and we've got to put the relationship first. And the relationship starts with the relationship with ourselves. And that allows us to be in relationship. So the first thing I would say is give yourself permission to pay attention to yourself and how you want to be in relationship with your kid, and lean into relationship. It's way more important than any towel that is bothering you on the floor. And then the second thing I would say is make it okay to make mistakes, and understand that the single most important life skill you can teach a teenager is that it's okay to ask for help. And that asking for help is not a weakness, it's a strength, and it's a life skill. And we have to do it by modeling it, and we have to do it by embracing it and verbalizing it. And we can't tell them to accept help, right? We have to enroll them in seeing the value to them in asking for and or accepting help. And that is an art.
Yes.
It really is.
Yes. Yes. And it's very interesting because one of my bonus daughters is particularly good at this. And it's like a marvel to notice her doing, and it means that she's constantly growing, and she comes up against really difficult things, and she keeps going because she keeps asking for support.
I did a podcast episode on our podcast with my middle daughter, who was then a graduate from college before medical school, and the head of disability services at her university. And the two of them came on together, and the message of that podcast was the most successful kids at college are the ones who know how to ask for help.
Ah, amazing.
It was very, very clear. Like, the kids who knew how to ask for the help they needed were fine. It was the kids who were like, I don't want it, I don't need it, I don't want to need it, that were struggling.
Interesting. Elaine Taylor-Klaus, thank you so much. If we have listeners who'd like to come and find you, how would they go about that?
So we are everywhere at Impact Parents or Impact ADHD. We do have a podcast. So if you're listening to this podcast, you probably love listening podcasts. I invite you to join us at the Parenting with Impact podcast, also wherever you podcast. And on that, we have lots of free gifts and resources and parent guides and newsletters. And we call ourselves a private sector business for the public good. So much of what we do is free. And then we also have free-based programs like our parent training program, and the Coach Approach is called Sanity School for Parents. And we have other coaching for parents and all kinds of resources as well. But whether it's with us or somewhere, just, get connected, get in community, and give yourself permission to get the support you need. It makes an enormous difference.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Elaine. If you found this useful, please share it with at least one other person. Or if you're feeling generous, you could leave a review on Apple, Audible, or stars on my website. It's www.teenagersuntangled.com. Elaine's information will be on there too. And in the podcast notes, you can message me on teenagersuntangled@gmail.com. That's it. Have a great week. Bye-bye.